Uh, yeah, and this isn't unusual. This is a asynchronous class. So I have
Mm.
never met any of these people in person except for Sarah, uh,
Wow.
because she took another honors class with me. And do you know who Brett Anthony Johnston is? Uh, he's a writer and the head of the Michener Center.
Yeah, the name is familiar, but I'm not sure.
He,
I'm we've never met.
yeah, he wrote a novel. What's its name, Sarah? I don't remember the name of the novel, but it's set in a similar to Branch Davidian.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's We Burn Daylight.
Yeah, that's
I
it.
think that's what
We
it
Burn
was.
Daylight, which is a good book. Yeah,
Hmm.
Cool.
and it is a love story like your book. Uh, it's the PR people compared it to Romeo and Juliet. He didn't compare it to that, but
Sure.
yeah. But she's the only one I've met. So you guys turn on your cameras. Be friendly. Uh, and I hope that you guys will ask questions and so that I can shut up. Otherwise, you'll hear too much from me.
Yeah, this will uh a dialogue is much more fun than a monologue, trust me.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting more and more people here. That's good. Well, let's start. Jamie, tell me, this was your first book, and you've written and published more
Hmm.
since then. The
Yeah,
the
this book was The Maiden Voyage.
Yeah, The Many Daughters of Afong Moy is your last one.
Hmm.
And it sounds like it was a lot more ambitious, and I have not read it, than your first three.
Yeah, yeah. My most recent book, Many Daughters, I think I have seven point of view characters, seven different timelines. It's historical, it's also speculative. It has some maybe soft sci-fi slash magical realism going on. It's a lot of genre smashing, which I enjoy, and I think that's going to be the what I'll be working on going forward, with the exception of the book I'm working on now, which is completely different. But yeah, Hotel on the Corner of Bittersweet. It was the second novel I had written, the first novel I'd published. The other novel was really just the practice run. I wrote the novel and it was like, cool. I wrote a book and then I rewrote it and I was like, wow, that first version really sucked. And I rewrote it again. I'm like, oh, that second version, you know, was lacking. And I just saw myself growing as a writer. I think I outgrew the story. And then I wrote Hotel really just for me. I'm half Chinese. I wrote it kind of processing the grief after losing my dad, who was full Chinese and spoke Cantonese fluently, and went to uh, Chinese school after public school to um, to learn what my grandma called city Cantonese. Um, where my dad's family is from. Really, most Chinese immigrants that came in the 1800s, they were from a region of southern China, and they spoke Toisanese. And it's a dialect. Best way I can describe Toisanese is it's like being from Appalachia. People hear your accent and they know you're not a city person. Um, and so, yeah, that's the family story. I had no idea the book would kind of take off, and now it's read in schools all over. It's in 35, 36 languages. It's been optioned for stage and film. It's been an interesting journey.
Yeah.
It became the tent pole of my career, which allowed me to write really whatever else I want. So I write short fiction just for fun in a bunch of different genres. So I've written steampunk and crime noir and middle grade horror and dystopian, and um, short
Would
fiction
you
is when I
uh,
get to sort of play around and
would you send me a story that I could teach?
sure. Yeah. I'll send you a bunch. You can take your
Okay.
pick.
I teach fiction writing as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's my noisy dog wandering off. Um,
What, so you Talk about the button.
Oh, the button. Yeah, it's funny. I'm I'm currently working on a nonfiction book that has to do with my dad in a way, because my dad always had lots of stories that I always discounted. And it's kind of the job description of parents to exaggerate the hardships of your childhood, that kind of thing. But my dad, he was the same age as the character of Henry during World War II, and he did wear one of those I am Chinese buttons because he talked about walking to school. He went to a public school, but kids would throw rocks at him, calling him a Jap, thinking he's Japanese, thinking it's a city where these two cultures got, you know, seen as one when they're really separate and distinct and were actually at war with one another. Um, so yeah, that's really kind of the genesis of the story. I was at a writing workshop 2006, that's 20 years ago. Um, and the guy running the workshop, he really talked about the idea of a noble romantic tragedy as something that he thought that was like the one thing he had never written. And I thought, oh, I think I'm actually kind of hardwired to write that book. Um, and
Can
so
you
it,
explain, can you explain the term?
noble romantic tragedy. It's a story that there's a love interest, but they may not end up together, but one's sacrifices themselves for the other kind of a thing. The classic is the movie Titanic, where they're both floating on the door, which they could both live on that door, but then, the woman's like, I'm anyway, Leonardo DiCaprio, let's go. He drowns.
Right.
There's debates ensue over the end of that movie, but that's kind of the classic noble romantic tragedy that I think contemporary audiences, would recognize.
So back to your story.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, talk more about that.
Oh,
That's the
um,
genesis of the book.
yeah. I I I wrote this short story at this workshop, and it had the characters of Henry and Keiko and Sheldon, and it had the button. And I met with an editor, and he said, "You should turn this into a novel." He said, I remember his quote, "The moral territory is novel length." And I thought, okay, that sounds pretty good. Um, and when you're starting out, any kind of validation you get is like it's narcotic. You write in isolation. Writers are just bundles of insecurity. And when someone in the industry says, "This is really good," it gets your attention. So, yeah, I really threw myself into this book. I couldn't find a redemptive ending, and I wanted there to be a beat of redemption. And that didn't happen. When families came back from internment camps, life didn't get better. Often it was worse because they returned to communities that feelings towards them had only gotten worse as more of their loved ones had been sent off to war and died. Um, and so a lot of people, that was the realization that they really had lost their homes, their farms, their businesses, their livelihoods. Um, but I remembered the Panama Hotel, and I had heard that the owner had discovered all these belongings in the basement. I thought those belongings were gone. I thought that was history. But those belongings are still there to this day, the belongings of 37 Japanese families in the basement. And so once I realized that, the hotel really became, this bridge between the past and the present. And that's when I realized I could create a narrative set in the 80s when the hotel changed hands, and I could kind of bounce back and forth. And again, I don't have a degree in creative writing. I was just kind of making this up as I go. So I'm figuring it out as I go along. And yeah, the split narrative really works for me. Most of my books do that because it allows a ton of flexibility when telling a story. Um, yeah, um, it's been an interesting journey with this book. I was sharing with a friend. I get emails from readers all the time from all over the world, different countries. I got an email um, from a mass shooter who's incarcerated who had read my book.
Wow.
So that's unusual. And that was, and he went in when he was 18. He's 50 now. And so he's well read, intelligent, um, kind of a deep person that just, really screwed up his life and the lives of others at a very young age when he really um, could not could not regulate his emotions. That's a gentle way of saying he killed several people.
Yeah. What were you doing back then? Were you working in advertising?
Yeah, I worked my parents. Um, my dad wanted me to be a fine artist, and my mom wanted me to be a novelist. Which, in retrospect, that's really weird because it's not real common for parents to encourage their kids to go into the arts because there's no well-lit path. It's it's a path filled with frustration, pain, and rejection. But that's what they wanted to do with their own lives, and their own lives did not turn out well for them. Um, and I went to a trade school, an art school, and so I have a 2-year degree in design. And I did that, was an art director and a graphic designer and a creative director for a number of years. But I was always writing on the side. When you work for an ad agency, you're really pimping your creative soul by the hour to your clients. They pay really well, but it's not the most satisfying work. And so I found myself when I was frustrated at work, I would write on the weekends just so I'd have this creative sandbox. And I enjoyed it so much, I thought someday I want to live in that sandbox. And now I do. I'm a full-time writer. Um, I've been a full-time writer since 2009, 2008. Um, but without the success of that book, um, I probably still have the day job, which is that's common. That's the norm. I'm sort of outside of the norm.
Yeah. Do you guys have questions? Like,
Please have questions.
I
yeah.
Yeah, go for it, Sarah.
um so I was kind of listening to like how you developed the story, and one thing that really drew me to your book, like it really pulled me in, is the music aspect.
Mm,
Um I felt like so much kind of that music pulled the characters through. It was like this tie. And I really wondered, like, what inspired you to use jazz in that way? What inspired Sheldon
yeah.
as a character?
Um, I really, part of historical fiction is I'm recreating that world. And if I recreated that world without jazz, it would have been false because of redlining, all of these communities of color were
Mhm.
congregated together. And so during World War II on South Jackson, which is the street that runs right through Chinatown, there were 38 jazz clubs. And I'd walk around Chinatown with my yeye, my grandfather, and he would point. He'd be like, Cab Calloway played over there, and Ella Fitzgerald played over there, and I was always just like, whatever, rolling my eyes because I'm a butthead, you know,
Yeah.
19-year-old. And as I was doing research, I realized it was true. Like there was this super vibrant jazz scene. The character of Oscar Holden is a real person. He's the
Yeah.
real character in the book. He left the South and ultimately went to Vancouver, British Columbia, but Seattle first with Jelly Roll Morton, who considers himself the inventor of jazz. So it just it needed to be there. And also, I try to write for all five senses. And if anyone is aspiring writer, you need to have your characters see things, smell things, touch things, taste things. It creates a more immersive experience, and music, it gives it a historical anchor and it gives it kind of an immersive flavor to it. As far as the character of Sheldon, um, I kind of based him off a friend, and I have since told him, um, we're still great friends to this day, but when his name is David Lewis, and Dave, when I was in high school, we worked together at a this seafood restaurant. We were busboys, and I'm like this short Chinese kid, and he's this very tall black basketball star of our high school. And and we became great friends. I mean, I saw him 2 weeks ago in Seattle. We're still friends to this day. And he was very protective of me. We figured it out later that we both had alcoholic parents, and so we didn't drink. And so if we were at a party and someone was offering me a beer, like David would get really, he would intervene. Um, but he called me his little brother. He would introduce me to people as his little brother and like, don't we look alike? You know, that kind of a thing. So that
Yeah.
vibe really came from Dave. Um, and yeah, I kind of wrote that character. I mean, Dave is his own unique, autonomous, cool, interesting dude. So he doesn't play um, jazz music or anything like that. So my
Mhm.
dog's growling here. Um, but kind of just the vibe of Sheldon and the kindness and the watchfulness um, comes from a very real person.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite characters in there. You can definitely that came through for
Oh,
sure.
cool.
But it's interesting that you were talking about the senses. So maybe that's why the music hit me so much. I am legally blind, so
Oh,
I listened to your book through Audible
cool.
because that's my mode, right? But I think that was another thing that I was interested in. Um, there are moments where Sheldon is playing in these powerful moments, right? The war has ended, and were there any songs that you thought about in these moments when he's just like playing? Did anything come to mind?
Oh, when it comes to the music, people people assume that I'm like a jazz aficionado. I'm much more of a blues guy. Um, but the jazz that I do like is jazz of that era where jazz,
Hmm.
there were big orchestras, and over time, jazz kind of, it fell out of favor, it atrophied, went from these big orchestras to ensembles to quartets to now it's just, a dude at a piano bar in
Hmm.
some hotel. And I just like that it was, and that's the beauty of art is art can bring people together from different walks of life. Um, I mean, art and cuisine, and to some degree, sports. So you can be, in a football stadium sitting next to someone who you have nothing in common with. Um, but at the time, jazz was one of those things that brought white people to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And where there's Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, Black people, like it's just this diverse community all enjoying the same thing. And at the time, that was pretty rare in our society. I mean, at times it still is, unfortunately. Um, so it served that purpose as well. I mean, just when I learned that there was a separate union for Black musicians, I mean, it's true. Uh, there's a musicians union in Seattle, and we think of Seattle as being the super progressive place. It was not back in the day. It was not even back in the 70s. Um, and uh, musicians of color were not allowed in the unions, so the Black musicians formed their own union, as they have done in other communities, since um, for a very long time. But
Hmm.
that showed just sort of a nuance that people aren't aware of, and just showing that Chinese and Japanese people are not the same. Like they have different experiences, different food, different history, yet they're in a city that homogenizes them, that just thinks, they're all the same. Um,
Right.
so there's just some interesting tension there.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Exactly.
That was what was going through my brain. The
Yeah.
music really stuck with me. I really, really appreciated it. Like, for me, as he's as he's playing tunes through different things, like just the atmosphere in my brain, I was kind of concocting these different feelings or these different vibes. So I'm guessing like I could probably pull up a song and apply it, and it would totally change the atmosphere of what was happening in your book. But
Cool.
I don't know. It was just something that I was curious about, and thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you listened to audiobook. I'm a big audiobook consumer. It's
Mhm.
just a great way to read a lot of books in a year. Um, yeah, and it's the book is um I visited the Montana School for the Deaf and Blind last month, and they had listened to the audiobook, but it's also in a couple free libraries for the visually impaired. Like in Minnesota. There's one in the Northwest. I think there's some regional ones. I don't know a lot about it, but I've been there to record like a special intro for some of those
Yeah.
editions, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I
Who
think I mean here in Austin, well here they do have like the Texas Talking Book program
Yeah,
that's
that's it.
totally
Yeah.
free.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one is a great one. I didn't check because I was just trying to get all my books, so Audible. But I read all the time. So and your book will be reread. I
Oh, thank you.
thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, I recommended it. So um, your book will be enjoyed through the rest of the year.
I
So
appreciate it. Um,
yeah, it was wonderful.
do
it's
you have any say so as far as who is the reader?
um
Um,
a little bit. Um, it's kind of like the cover design. They it's like a relationship. It's like a marriage. You know, both parties want the other to be happy. Um, so they subcontract the audiobook to a company, and then they will cast it, and they'll send me samples of who they've cast. And there's only been one book where I said, I don't think this voice works. And they quickly found somebody else, but they're they're really good. They know what they're doing. They hire voice talent that a lot of these voice actors are actors, and doing audiobooks is a kind of a side hustle. Um, but they know how to perform. Um, and they just a good audiobook reader or ensemble can just bring so much to a book. They can really make it come alive. So, and as far as audiobooks, I did have Audible. I switched about a year ago to Libro FM, which I highly recommend. It functions just like Audible, but um, you can assign an independent bookstore. So some of the just a small fraction of the profits from that audiobook goes to an independent bookstore. It's just a way of not letting Amazon rule the entire world,
Right.
which is tough.
Yes, that
Yeah.
that's good to know. What was it called?
Libro.
Libro. Okay.
Libro FM. You'll see it. And with Libro, when you download audiobooks, they're yours. They stay on your device, even if you discontinue Libro. With Audible, not so much. It's
Right.
sometimes harder to access your library.
Yep. No, that is
Mhm.
good information to have.
It is, yeah. When someone told me about it, I was like, let me check this out. It's been great.
Awesome.
Other questions?
Yeah. Other questions?
I have one. You mentioned basing Sheldon off of one of your friends. Did you have any like someone you were basing Keiko off of?
I laugh nervously. Not directly. But I did use the name. Like I have a friend. It's you're gonna think every named character in my book is someone in my life. It's not quite so, but at the time, I had a friend named Keiko Okabe. I mean, we're still friends. I was working and living in Hawaii at the time when I knew Keiko, and I just I liked the sort of the internal alliteration of the name, the Keiko Okabe. Henry Lee. I sometimes alliterate my characters. I don't know. Maybe it's kind of an homage to Marvel Comics where so many characters, Doctor Doom, J. Jonah Jameson, Peter Parker, Reed Richards. It's all alliterated, and Shakespeare alliterated lots of things. So I it just popped into my head and it worked. Yeah, I went with Keiko to see the Beastie Boys um, years ago in my my past life. Um, and she's lives in Los Angeles and is married and has a family. And I did a gig there at the um, Japanese American National Museum, and she was able to come, and I was able to point out here's Keiko. Personality wise, completely different. No similarity to the character in the book. I just liked the name. I thought it was um, I don't know, I just like the way it flowed.
I have a
You
question. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I have a question about your research. When you were going through your research, did you come across any common themes or similarities between families that were able to rebound post being in the camps and families that struggled being in the camps or when they got out?
Wow. That's a big question, and I don't I certainly don't have all the answers. Um, we start to delve into real sort of sorry, my dogs are mugging me. Whenever I'm talking to someone, they suddenly feel like they need to fight for my attention.
Mine
So
are right here doing the same exact
yeah,
thing.
like
See, there they go, barking.
it's just
Me
fuck,
too,
it's
man.
them.
Me too.
Yeah.
God bless.
Um, yeah. Some of the okay. One moment. I'm gonna put them out of my office. Let's go. Let's go. Those are gone. This
Zachary, yours are quite calm.
Yes, they are just,
They're
uh,
chilling.
yep, yep.
the
I,
the some families left camp early because there was a labor shortage during the war. So people left camp and they went deeper to the interior of the country. So they went to Chicago or Milwaukee or um, to work in factories, and to some of them had scholarships. And I think those families had a lead because they were entering communities where they weren't a threat. There's a strange dynamic, I think, with um, blending of communities. If you like in Montana, if there's one kid who's a person of color in a school of 50, that person stands out, is accepted, is unique. It's when there's parity, when it's 25 and 25, and sort of the tribal mentality comes out in some people. Um, and so I think the people that came out early did better. But as far as a case by case basis, it's really hard to to get a metric on that. The example I would use is in the front of the book. There's a photo of a little girl, and that's a photo from the Dorothea Lange collection. And that little girl, her name is May Yanagi, and she's still alive. And we've done book events together. And I interviewed her one time. Yeah, oh, right on, cool. Yeah, I interviewed her, and she was a little girl when she was in camp. And so she said, I enjoyed it. This was the first time I was in a class of all Japanese kids. I didn't feel like, I was unwanted. Um, but she was very guarded too. And I didn't push too much. But the next day she called me back and was like, I really want to talk more. And that's when really kind of the anger came out. And she said, my dad, he had a farm and he had a business and he lost all of it. He died as a bus driver. And so there was one generation where they just lost everything. And it's that generation also went through the Great Depression. So it was probably the second time they had economic calamity. And then there's a younger generation that was somewhat unaffected, in that they didn't lose, their homes and businesses. So it was, I think, um, and even within the Japanese American community, there were there were people that really wanted to cooperate with the U.S. to the detriment of their Japanese American neighbors, where they were turning in um, each other in certain communities. The JACL, the Japanese American Citizens League, really sided with the U.S. government, and the head of the JACL was, you know, a lot of people. He was a much hated figure at that time. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance, a lot of insider baseball. But yeah, good question. I appreciate it. Other questions?
I've got a question.
Sure.
You were talking about the Panama Hotel and the items that were left behind from these intern families. Uh, can you explain some of these items that were left behind? Anything that sparked some items in the story, or
Sure. Anything that I mentioned in the book was in the basement. So I mentioned like a steamer trunk that says Shimizu. I mentioned some baby shoes, perfume bottles. When the great thing now is, you know, I published a bunch of books and I've won some awards, and I can approach a historical society or a museum, and they'll talk to me. Back then, I was non-published, so when I approached the hotel owner and I wanted to go in the basement, I'm just a random dude. Um, you know, and she really, we're good friends now, but at the time she kind of just brushed me off. And my dogs, um, um, but I really want to go to the basement. So I flew out to Seattle. I sat in the tea room for an entire day. And maybe about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she finally stopped and gave me time. And she's like, okay, what are you doing? What do you, and I said that I'm a writer. I'm working on a novel. I really want to go in the basement. And she said, well, I do tours of the basement, but it's a minimum of 8 people. And I was like, cool, I'll pay for 8. And I did. And I went on the tour by myself. And then that allowed us to spend time together. So we spent 3 hours in the basement going through a lot of these belongings. And I had a real reverence for going down there. And so I didn't take any photos. I brought a sketchbook and I just wrote things in the sketchbook. And then those things appear in the book. And there's stuff down there that's less interesting, like mattresses and bed frames, you know, practical things that we all have in our homes. Not everything was of deep personal value, but there were, you know, yearbooks, and there were photos, and there were things that people wanted to hang on to. Wedding dresses, special clothing. There was a lot of, like, there was a collection of Japanese baseball cards, um, which were amazing. There, and the baseball cards were round, and hand illustrated, mass produced baseball cards, that were, you know, for teams in, you know, Yokohama and places like that. So there's just a lot of really interesting stuff there, and it's still there to this day. Um, it's a it's a little it's a tricky situation because Jan, the owner, she's really a one woman show, and she's very guarded, and we're very close, but I do worry, because Jan's in her mid 80s, what's going to happen to the hotel, and by extension, the belongings when she passes away. Um, we're close enough where I can sit down with her and, like, Jan, what are you gonna do with this hotel when you die? Like we can have that child to parent discussion almost. And she's hard. She won't, like, I've suggested helping her create uh, a trust that she can donate the hotel to. The trust can pay her a fixed amount for the rest of her life, and then the trust can carry out her wishes after she's gone. And she loves that idea, but she she won't she won't pull the trigger on anything. It's going to be really strange. Over the years, she's had cash offers for that building, like $12 million, and she's always passed them up. She wants to keep it as a living museum. But it's a very valuable piece of real estate, and it was declared a national treasure, but money bends a lot of things. So there's been cases where a national treasure has been sold, but then the person doing the buying fixed up two other buildings, to sort of um, pacify critics and things like that. So I'm see what happens. Yeah, she always asks me like, "Do you want to buy a hotel?" I'm like, "Jan, if I had $12 million, I might consider it, but no. I want to help you not get taken advantage of by scrupulous real estate developers who want to turn it into a giant Starbucks or something."
Jamie, you've talked about that you have been surprised by the lack of knowledge of general public about the internment. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's better now. There's a foundation in Seattle called the Densho Foundation, and they record the oral history of the Japanese internment. And so Tommy Keta, who ran Densho, or he founded Densho, it was his goal that by the time I think it was like 2020 or 2015, that everyone in America will have heard of the Japanese internment. That was his goal. And I think we're closer to that. But when the book was published in 2009, on my first book tour, I went to a bookstore in Chicago, and a woman came up to me and said, "Hi, I'm a retired high school history teacher. I never knew this happened." And that blew my mind. But there was kind of an embargo um, by our government on like all these photo collections. They were inaccessible until the 80s, until there were reparations, until there was an apology and a redress. So there was an embargo on a lot of materials that pertain to the internment. And also in a lot of Japanese American families, they didn't talk about it. So there was kind of a wall of silence there as well. Um, yeah, that was even me. I grew up in Seattle and I have an institutional knowledge of the internment. I have a friend childhood friend whose father went to camp as a little boy. And my knowledge is really broad, but it wasn't very deep. And the more you head towards the East Coast, the Holocaust uh, kind of takes over that bit of World War II history, if you will. I mean, there's room for both for sure, but um, because that one's been in books and films and shows. I mean, it's that story's been told a lot, and rightfully so. But the Japanese internment, my daughter, I mean, she's a young adult now, but when the book came out, she came home. She was in, I guess, maybe the ninth grade, and she had her ninth grade history book, and it's like this thick. And I immediately looked to the appendix, and there's the internment, and I found it, and the Japanese internment was half a page, and it was given the same amount of real estate as the cotton gin, which is what I often compare it to. And if we forget that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, we're not taking a huge step backwards as a society. But if we forget that we incarcerated 124,000 people, most of whom were American-born citizens, then we're really, we are taking a step back. Um, Whenever I say that, somewhere there is a cotton gin enthusiast who's going to pop up and like, you don't understand. It caused the panic of 76, which led to a global depression. So there was much more to the cotton gin than just that, but um, you kind of have to go deep into the history there. Um, yeah, so it was shocking that a lot of people were unaware. It After 9/11, there were a couple books published by people who, they're bomb throwing ideologues who make money making people upset. And so there were some people that wrote books um, using the Japanese internment as the reason why we should incarcerate Muslim Americans. So that vibe is still out there in our culture, probably now more than ever.
Yeah.
In the back of the in the back of a hotel, I think there's a Q&A or something, and I mentioned that I can't imagine something like this ever happening again. And I'm unfortunately wrong. Um, so it's a strange time. Um, yeah, I lots of opinions there. Yeah,
Right.
my daughter-in-law is a Nicaraguan green card holder. She's in a doctoral program. She's brilliant, but she lives in Minneapolis. And yeah, there was a while there where they couldn't leave their house, um, living like it was COVID, for fear of being grabbed and deported to a country that she's not originally from.
More questions? Did you look a lot at the Dorothea Lang photos?
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, Dorothea Lange, you might remember from like your high school. There's a very famous Dust Bowl era photo of a woman. It's black and white, and she has her children. And that's one of Dorothea Lange's famous photos. But I mean, she was prolific. She and Ansel Adams, who were really the two major photographers of that era, both went into internment camps and took all kinds of photos of just daily life there to document it. And then those photos were not allowed to be seen by the public until the 80s. Um, the the U.S. government, the photos that you would often see of the internment, people are smiling. Um, and the U.S. government went into internment camps and took happy photos for propaganda purposes, um, which is what governments do. And so it wasn't until 40 years later that you really got to see what life was like. Those photos are great. I mean, in addition to just they're just brilliant photographers, so their work is gorgeous, um, beautiful, well framed, but it's very gripping. And all of that's available in the National Archives now, which is anyone can go online and go through all of those collections. And some of those collections have traveled the country for exhibits and things like that. Um, yeah, it's weird to have such a visceral record, and then it's hidden for 40 years. Um, and people didn't know it was hidden because they didn't know it existed, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's
Can
weird.
you talk more about the research involved in doing historical fiction, how you went about it?
Mm. Yeah. The research. Yeah, I obsess over little details. I got into that habit with Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet because those details pertain to someone's actual life, and I didn't want to misrepresent anything. Um, so I kind of carry that work habit forward into all my other books where I will research obsessively over small details that most people probably don't care about, but it becomes real for me when I get it right. There's some details that I just let go, um, but not important things. An example was I think I use a metaphor where I mentioned Casper the Friendly Ghost, which is a cartoon character. This is 1943, and Casper wasn't invented until 1944. My copy editor pointed that out, and I'm like, I don't really care. It's not doesn't disrupt the story either way. But there are people that care, and they all emailed me to let me know that I got it wrong. So there were some Casper enthusiasts out there. But for the most part, um, I go to museums and historical societies for research. I interview people firsthand if I can, if there are people of that era still alive. I buy stuff off of eBay. Like I buy newspapers from that era and yearbooks from that era, and I just want to see the what the world was like. I want to know who the Kardashians were of 1943. You know that what people were gossiping about and talking about, and that really helps contextualize everything. And so I started collecting maps of Seattle because Seattle, the international district, is bisected by the interstate. But during World War II, the interstate wasn't there, and it was a much larger neighborhood. And so I needed to see what that would look like. And so the maps were super helpful. And then occasionally you'll stumble into someone's, their master's thesis or doctoral thesis online where they've gone really deep into one aspect of the neighborhood or one aspect of some historical event. And sometimes those are really useful. So I dig, 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 dig. Like my walls over here are covered with maps and all the things for something that I'm working on now. And I research until I get to the point where I'm afraid I'm going to forget things, and then I start writing. Like when my brain's ready to explode and I need to get stuff um, on the page. And
You,
that's
you sometimes find yourself getting lost in the research.
yeah, yeah. I think anyone that writes historical fiction, that's the risk. You
Yeah.
can read books all day and call it work. And yeah, I have to kind of pull back because I could almost do research to the exclusion of ever writing anything. It's like if you go on Wikipedia and you're looking for this one specific answer, but then there's a link and you click on that one and that one, and you spent 90 minutes going down some rabbit hole that you didn't anticipate. With historical research, it's the exact same thing. And it's fun, it's enjoyable. You you're you're adding knowledge so it doesn't feel like you're wasting your time. But yeah, it can really it can get in the way of actually writing. Writing's much harder.
Do a lot of that, just minus the writing. So I just lost
Yeah,
on Wikipedia for my own
yeah,
fun. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, it is a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. I mean, that's the internet has some wonderful places and some terrible places, but Wikipedia is a wonderful place.
Yeah. Can you talk about your name?
Oh, my name. Let's see. Um, my you were probably talking about my last name, but I can actually talk about my first name too.
Oh,
Um,
well, yeah, sure.
Yeah, my last name is Ford. My great grandfather came to this country around 1865, and around 1890, he changed his name from Min Chung to William Ford. Um, no one really knows completely why, but I suspect it was so he could buy property. Um, he moved to Nevada. Nevada was a territory. He bought property there, and it's very likely he bought it from someone back east who didn't know who was buying it. Um, and having a Western name, that makes things work a little easier. Um, and so, yeah, I'm kind of the last of the Chinese Fords. It's, it's, I met another person whose uncle is a Chinese Ford, and we just assume we must be related. And we weren't. They immigrated to Canada, and they also chose the last name Ford. So maybe there's more Chinese folks out there with Western names than we realize. And then my name Jamie. My birth name is James, but my Chinese grandmother called me Jamie, which it's like my little chart of my family name. So she would call me Jameh, which means beautiful destiny. So go,
That's great.
go, grandma, giving
Yeah.
me giving me a baller name. I love it. Um, but yeah, it's odd because my grandfather was an actor in Hollywood, and by actor I mean he was an extra in like 300 films. He rarely had a few speaking words, but he went back and used the family name Chung. So he went by George Ford Chung. That's what it says on his Screen Actors Guild card and things like that. And I think that just eased the confusion if they're, casting. It's a casting session and they call for George Ford and a Chinese dude walks in. It confuses people. So he went back to the name. Um, yeah, that's it's s- story of assimilation, which is so common for most of our grandparents. Doesn't matter if you're from Albania or Korea or China or Scotland. This sort of way we sort of bend our story a little bit to fit the shape of what's accepted in this country.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of the theme with the parents of
Yeah,
both wanting assimilation and not.
for sure. Yeah, there's a generation that holds on to a lot of cultural baggage. By that I mean, when I lived in Hawaii, I worked with a Chinese woman, and she married a Japanese man, and her parents refused to attend the wedding because she was marrying a Japanese guy. This is 1994, not 1944. So there are people that they take that stuff to the grave, you know. And I get it. Like my family's been here since the 1800s, so you wouldn't go to my house growing up and we would have photos of, my uncle serving in, the Chinese Nationalist Army or something like that. Because we'd been here. But I had friends who they did have, grandfathers and uncles killed by the Japanese during World War II. So they have stronger opinions naturally. Um, yeah.
Th Going off of that, there's a
Sure.
strong theme of the father and the son. Henry's father and him, Henry and his son Marty. Uh, can you talk about that?
Sure. I didn't realize there was going to be a father and son thing in the book. It just started appearing on the page, and I knew where it was coming from, so I just leaned into it. And that happens a lot with novelists. Like we're writing something, but something from our subconscious starts manifesting into the scene. Um, and I see that when I visit ESL classes, English as a second language, which I visit those classes once in a while. First time I visited, they were reading my books. I was just expecting, yeah, I had never been to an ESL class. I was just assuming it was in Seattle. I was assuming all the students were Asian, Chinese or Japanese, but they were from everywhere, Pakistan, Bahrain, and they all shared the same experience of their parents wanting them to come here and become American, have all the advantages that citizenship would allow them, but also really wanted to hang on to their identity. And it's this push-pull of what's accepted within those families and those cultures. So it's a struggle and it's a struggle today for people immigrating to this country of how much of their culture do they retain, how much do they, you know, blend it with the broader American society. Um, and so Henry and his father, they represent those three generations where his father is he's unmovable. He just has a lot of biases and prejudices. And then there's Henry who kind of just wants to please his father, but he is seeing the better life. And then he has his younger son who doesn't even know what the big deal is because he grew up in a world where it didn't matter. Um, Yeah, and I had a people ask if like my father or grandfather were like Henry's father. No, my my grandfather, my Chinese grandfather was like a teddy bear. My Chinese grandmother was like Henry's father, was this stern matriarch of the family. Um, kind of this, yeah, she renamed three of my cousins. She was like a mafia boss of our family. My cousin Cynthia, she did not know her name was Dorothy until she was six, or not Dorothy, Dolores until she was 16 and had to go get her birth certificate so she could get a driver's license. And she's like, who is this? And my aunt's like, that's you. You know, uh, Auntie Ethel renamed you. She thought Dolores was a terrible name. So she was kind of like that. Um, and yeah, the book I'm working on now is very much a father-son book, in a completely different way. But
I'm intrigued by the woman who works in the cafeteria.
Mrs. Beatty.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, this will you'll probably find this interesting. People will sometimes email me and they'll, we speak at a book event and they like how I describe my characters. Um, and I actually under describe my characters. And I think of it as like a circuit. I don't complete the circle, and then the reader completes the circuit with their own experiences of what they see, and then the characters come alive in their imagination. Um, the example of this is I never say Mrs. Beatty's ethnicity, and yet in northern states they all assume she's white, and in southern states they often assume she's black. And I don't say either way. And I just say like you're both correct. Like I don't say her ethnicity for the story isn't a huge part of it, so it doesn't really matter. Um, but people see these things through the lens of their own experience, and they bring something to the party, and it comes alive. And that's really what they talk about when you put a book out. It stops being this thing that belongs to you. It sort of belongs to readers and to the world, and they interpret it um, the way they interpret it. It's very personal.
Um, I appreciate the way the world is not thrown at us, that the details of your research are not thrown at us, but the characters walk through that world.
Yeah.
And
And that's by design. I really think a non-fiction book about the internment is one thing, but a novel allows you to, step into someone else's shoes and experience it. There's kind of a saying, um, nonfiction tells you what happened, historical fiction tells you how it felt. And I think there's a real power to that.
yeah. Any other questions? We're right at an hour. Uh, Anything else you want to say to these guys?
Um, yeah, every family has a story, you know. And those stories are worth writing down. Those stories are worth recording. Both my parents are gone, all my grandparents are gone, um, and I lost them all too early, honestly. And so I always encourage people, especially students, um, to interview your parents, interview your grandparents, ask all the hard, difficult questions because once they're gone, suddenly you will want to know the answers and you won't be able to ask. So it's something that and it's tough because we have varying relationships with our parents, and I did not always get along well with my dad. Um, and so there's so many things I wish I had asked that I didn't know that I'm actually writing about now.
Ada says she'll keep that in mind. Thank you for the
Yeah,
advice.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for reading my book, and I really enjoyed chatting with everyone.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time out of your
My
day.
pleasure. Thanks, Joe. Good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Take care.